Hello and welcome to Hawkeye Nation. This is HawkCast, your Iowa football, basketball, and recruiting podcast brought to you by Hawkeye Beacon and Rivals.com. I'm your recruiting analyst and host, Eliot Clough, at Eliot Clough on Twitter, joined by Ross Binder, managing editor of the site. Just the old dynamic duo from last summer back at it once again here on this, is it Wednesday? I don't have my watch on. Wednesday morning. Uh,
Yep.
and we're gonna get you all things Iowa Hawkeyes as football kicks off. Camp specifically kicks off today in Iowa City. Before we get started, make sure that wherever you're listening, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google Play, etc., make sure you're subscribed because you might be listening but not subscribed. Make sure you do that so you don't miss an episode. If you're on YouTube, drop a like, drop a comment, and of course, hit that subscribe button there as well. We just passed 1,000 subscribers a couple episodes ago. So moving in the right direction. We'd love to have more of you along the way. So tell a friend about the show as well. So today, Ross and I, like I said, fall camp kicking off in Iowa City for the guys. It's going to be intense for the next month or so for them, and we're gonna preview a little bit of that and talk about who needs the biggest camp, why, and a few other things. So Ross, I've got a list here on our little outline, but I'm curious, who's the first person or first player you think of when it comes to this roster, other than like the freshmen and the transfers, right? That need the biggest camp. And maybe it is a transfer because you're looking at Brennan Sullivan, who was number 3 on the depth chart, or Jacob Gill, who wasn't on the depth chart. But freshman, it's obvious. Anyway, of the guys who are showing up, the entire team, who needs the biggest camp to you?
Yeah, you noted this is Wednesday. It's the July 31st. We're officially a month out from start of the season, August 31st. Iowa will finally, get the 2024 season going. So we are, the end is in sight of the off season for us, which is a relief. When you're talking about which players need the biggest camps, I think Sullivan's an easy answer, but I'm going to actually go with the receivers, and I would say Jerry Bowie and Dayton Howard. And I just think, I would need somebody to really emerge at that wide receiver position. And, you got some great quotes from Ferentz at Big Ten Media Days. He talked about, I would need some good surprises there, like guys that, show up and are making plays this fall that maybe people aren't totally expecting because they haven't done it before. The wide receiver production the last few years has been abysmal. We all know that. We've seen it. It's not good. So you need guys that are gonna, have those games like, whoa, 8 catches for 80 yards or whatever. It's like, oh, I didn't, and not sure he had that in him. And seeing that he does, that's going to be a big change. And maybe you talk about the surprises. Maybe they won't be as much of a surprise if we see and hear about them, kind of elevating their performances during camp this month. If these are the guys getting a lot of buzz, that's a good sign heading into the fall, I think.
So when putting the outline together, the first name I thought of was Dayton Howard. And you could throw Jerry at Bowie in there for sure. The difference between those two to me, well, is one, the depth chart, something that everybody's seen.
Yep.
But two, Kirk actively talked about Jarriett. And he talked about Dayton too, but we talked about Jarriett a lot more. Jarriett was made available to the media. To me, that's telling in a variety of ways. It's like, okay, you expect something from this guy, right?
Right.
Especially if he hasn't registered a catch yet.
Yeah.
Andy's a redshirt freshman.
Yep.
Okay, you expect something from this guy. And Jarriett also, and we've heard this from Caleb Brown. We've heard it from Jacob Gill, who was also a new fresh face that probably could use a good amount of camp, considering he's not listed on the depth chart specifically. But both made available to the media. All three of those guys said, I could play inside, I could play outside. That's just the way this goes. And we hear that. We heard that last year too. But I believe that's more of a function of Tim Lester's offense as well. Like Dayton Howard is probably only going to play on the outside. He might play a
Yeah.
little on the inside because he's 6'4", right?
Yeah.
And I also list Dayton Howard because he is more so that true X because he is 6'4", whereas Jerry at Bowie's 6'1". So it's a little bit of a difference. And if you're going to have a go up and get a guy, or a true deep threat. I think Jarriett Bowie is more inclined to be more of a deep threat at that X than Dayton Howard just because of pure speed. But Dayton Howard's a guy that could really use it. And Kirk did bring him up unprompted at Big Ten Media Days. However, it was, yeah, I saw some things. And you know, it was a lot of that with Jarriett too. He could be a good player for us, but the one time Dayton was mentioned, it was we saw some things in spring, right? And so Dayton for him, it's to make it come full circle. And he's a guy that Iowa needs because he's really the only, well, he's the only true X other than Reese. And Reese, I believe, got hurt in track. He didn't participate in the Shrine Bowl, though he was signed up. He was there. I don't know how much he's been participating in off-season work, but those two are really the true X's on the squad. And there are there's a not a bevy, but there's a decent amount of those slot guys, right? The Caleb Browns.
Absolutely.
So, you know, you just need that true X. And I think Dayton Howard could be that.
I completely agree with that. You know, if you're thinking about some recent player comps, you know, to me, Dayton Howard is maybe, you know, the most of a true X Iowa's had since maybe like Brandon Smith, like, you know, 3, 4, or 5 years ago. And then, you know, Jarriett Bowie's maybe a little bit more like Smith Marset, kind of that outside guy, speed guy. And you're right. I mean, Iowa has not had a guy like Howard, that X receiver for a while now. And that's something the offense, the passing game, obviously, can really use. So I think you're right. If he's able to take that step forward, or a couple steps forward during camp, that would be really big for this offense because there aren't a lot of other guys that can do that role in a really effective way. It doesn't look like. I mean, you mentioned Reese, but it's tough. Even if he isn't banged up, it's tough that's a lot to put on a true freshman coming in, you know? So yeah, I think there's a lot of pressure, but kind of a good pressure on Dayton Howard, I think, to step up there.
And Vanderzee, who more recently played quarterback than wide receiver,
Yeah,
for his high school team for his senior year, which of course is not unusual. Zach Lutmer did that, Cooper DeJean did that, TJ Washington did that too. But I'll go with this next one, and I'm going to skip who I have listed next, but I'm going to go to Brian Allen because I think we've talked about this previously on the pod. This is in my potential breakout players article, which again, you can find that on iowa.rivals.com, Hawkeye Beacon. I'm really happy with that. That list of guys who I listed as potential breakouts. Jarriett's in there, Dayton's in there. And so you can see that rest of that list. But to me, Brian Allen is on this list because the unit needs him. And we're going to talk about units that need it the most. But they need that dynamic speed, just freak pass rusher.
Yep.
Okay, let me take a step back. Maybe they don't need it just because of the function of how the DL works, the defensive line works under Kelvin Bell and Phil Parker, but they could sure as hell use it.
Yeah.
And
it wouldn't be a bad thing. I know
that.
Right,
right, exactly. You can get a guy that you know every play the opposing team needs to double him. And they don't see him as that right now because he hasn't put it together on the field yet. And he has those physical tools. It's about whether or not he fits what's going on. And really learns the defensive line. And for that reason, you know, you could throw Jeremiah Pittman in there. You could throw Jeff Bowie in there. You could throw in the Luke Gaffney and the Will Hubert, the two walk-ons that might play a defensive tackle. And I would list the group as a whole for that reason. But the defensive line right now is probably about 6 deep. Probably somewhere in there. You got Ethan Herkett, Deontay Craig, Aaron Graves, Y.A. Black, Max Llewellyn, and Jeremiah Pittman as far as guys who have really seen time. But you need more. Like Deontay Craig could probably have some of that positional flexibility, play some of the 3 tech. But you know, I listed Max Llewellyn as a potential breakout too, because he's a guy who has some experience. He has that frame. He's a guy who can get after the pass rusher. But again, if there's anybody in this group, it's Brian Allen to me because he has that ceiling, right? He was a 4-star for a reason coming out of St. Thomas More in Connecticut. Like we've seen the flashes. Put it together now. We've seen the flashes. Put it together.
Yeah, I agree. I think he's got the most upside of those guys that you listed in that terms of those bench guys, and who can become a key contributor. And like you said, the defensive line needs that. They need to go more than six deep. They need those impact, subs off the bench that can come on and create some havoc. He could, the best case scenario for him is that he's somebody like a Van Ness or a AJ Epinesa. When he started in his career, he wasn't actually a starter, but he came in off the bench and just wreaked havoc. Now, I'm not expecting Allen to be, the next coming of Epinesa. That's too much to put on him. But having a guy like that can come in off the bench, create havoc in the pass rush, blow up some plays and just kind of make things hard on those offensive linemen. They're like, oh man, here comes another guy. Like, that's something that would be big for this defense, because right now you feel good, like you said, about, 5, 6 guys. After that, it gets, okay, these are guys that can play, but what can they do? Can they make plays? Can they, to keep this defense at the level that it's been at for the last couple of years, some of those guys have to really make those big plays and show up big time. And Allen is the best bet of the guys that you listed off there to fill that role.
We'll get a little bit more into that defensive line depth here in a moment when we talk about positional units as a whole. But tell me any other guys that stick out to you, Ross, that need a big camp as far as individuals go.
Yeah, it's interesting. I was been thinking about this since we started talking about the podcast, and it's such a weird training camp in the sense that there are so many returning starters, and we're going to hit on this in a little bit, but the position battles isn't as big of a thing as it is in many years, because there's so many guys coming back that you expect them to start again, obviously. I'm gonna, just looking at the list that you set up there, the offensive line is definitely one area where there is, some competition, in terms of Bo Stevens and Tyler Ellsbury, who gets that last kind of interior guard spot, basically. Most of the others, a lot of the spots on the line seem pretty set. Logan Jones at center, Colby at right guard, and Richmond and Dunker on the tackles. So that there's kind of just one spot up for grabs there. And, is it going to be Stevens? He's on top of the depth chart now. Everyone likes Ellsbury a lot. He's played well in the past. So, I think that's, the left guard spot, I don't think is the sexiest position battle, obviously, but it's one of the more relevant ones for this Iowa team. It seems like in this training camp.
Yeah, so I guess I put them both there because if there is probably a position battle, it's probably for left guard. And like you said, it's not sexy, but it's important.
Yeah.
And Bo Stevens has been a starter before. Tyler Ellsbury impressed last year in lieu of Logan Jones being hurt. Who gets that spot? That's why it's so important, because of course you want to be confident in your backup center, in what's going on in the interior. I don't even know, and I'm going to write an article about this maybe today, at least at some point soon, about an answer that Kirk had when it came to the offensive line this year. Because last season at Media Days, we talked about the growth of the offensive line and what they needed. And Kirk said it's a difference of maturity in 2023. That's what it was. And I asked him what takes them to that next level this year, and he says the camp is when we find out. and again, we'll talk about the offensive line unit as a whole in a second, but Bo Stevens has the potential to be a mauler. Like, he was a 4-star. He chose Iowa over some pretty big schools. And then there's Tyler Ellsbury, who was solid last year. And maybe at some points in the year, and what you need from this offense, you just need solid, right? You don't need that high end because they've been not solid. So if you can have somebody that will be that on every rep in Tyler Ellsbury, whereas Bo Stevens can come out and just maul guys. What do you want? What do you want on a more consistent basis? Can Bo Stevens do that on a consistent basis? Can he rise to the occasion? I believe, was he hurt a good part of last year?
Yeah, I mean, there were so many like so many guys on that offensive line were banged up. But yeah, I think Stevens was out or limited for a while for sure.
Yeah. Mason was hurt the whole year. Logan Jones
Yep.
was hurt. Jennings Dunker was dealing with injuries. Connor Colby, I'm sure, had something here and there.
Yeah,
But
it was rough season for the OL in terms of health.
sure. And honestly, I just looked through the roster and, preventing listing an obvious name, I'm not seeing a bunch of guys that stick out that wouldn't be obvious um, as far as needing a big fall camp when considering we're also going to be talking about position groups. So why don't we move on there?
I think there is one other position battle that is interesting to me, and we've already talked about it on in previous podcasts. I think we'll talk about it some more in this one too. But that left cornerback battle, John Nestor got listed on top of the depth chart there as the starter, over TJ Hall, and over Deshaun Lee. So, that I think is going to be a real interesting. Does he hang on to that starting job? I mean, they clearly have a lot of confidence in him. I mean, he's listed on top of the depth chart, I would say, for a reason. We've heard all kinds of good things from coaches and teammates about how he's performed in off-season workouts and stuff like that. He was a fixture on special teams last year, which is obviously a pipeline towards especially in the secondary, to being a future starter. So like he's ticked all the boxes, and I would say he's ahead of schedule if he's already listed as a starter. And if you can hang on to that, you've talked about him before, and if he hangs on to the starting job and is as good as kind of it seems like he could be, that could be a huge thing for the defense and the secondary. That's really kind of lifts their ceiling even higher. I feel like.
So I didn't list John here, and I'm honestly, I guess I was hesitant too because he clearly did impress enough to get that starting job. I mean, if he takes it to another level in in fall camp, then awesome, like great. I would almost say there's more. I don't know if we're necessarily talking about pressure, but pressure on a guy like Deshaun Lee, who has already started and has seen his starting position
That's
usurped by a sophomore.
Yeah, that's fair. I mean, you're right. Maybe the actual, Lee and Hall are the guys that need to have big camps then to. I mean, they're still going to play. Obviously, they're going to be in on dime packages and other and subbed out and everything. But
Probably on
yeah, if
special
they
teams too. I wouldn't
special
be surprised
teams,
if TJ Hall's a gunner.
absolutely right. So, but yeah, if they want that starting job opposite Harris, you're going to need a big fall camp because, like you said, it does look like Nestor has, uh, you know, maybe entrenched himself there pretty well potentially.
Right. In writing that breakout article, which of course John was included in that as well. Um,
Yep.
it's just so curious to me that he's listed as the second string cash. Then again, it's like Nick DeYoung, just to relate where he's at and what I think about the depth chart. Like if anybody gets hurt on the starting offensive line, Nick DeYoung's plugging in and playing, or
Mhm.
Tyler Ellsbury. Like if
Yep.
it's a right, like Trevor Lauk is not really the backup right tackle. It would be Nick DeYoung, right?
Yep.
So I guess I'm curious about that. Like, is Nestor moved to the cash? Like if Sebastian's out for whatever reason, if Nestor's moved to the cash, is he moved to the cash, or is it like Wampa and like is Cohen entering or healthy, and like is Zach Lutmer gonna come in and play a safety spot, or does Nestor move to the cash and they bring in TJ Hall or Deshaun Lee? Like that's just so curious to me because
Yeah.
inevitably something's gonna happen. Like knock
Right.
on wood, you don't want any major injuries, but it's not a contact sport; it's a collision sport.
Yeah.
Somebody's gonna get hurt.
Yeah. You just can't expect all those guys to play every snap, for 13, 14 games. That's a dream. It's not a realistic one. So I'm curious too, like what happens if something happens to Castro? Um does Nestor fill in there? I still feel like if Trigger's healthy, then he's going to be the guy that would fill in at strong safety or Cash if Castro or Wampa is unavailable. But I mean, you're right. Nestor's listed as the backup Cash. I assume for a reason. It wasn't just nonsense. But yeah, that is a very curious one and we'll see if it plays out that way, I guess.
So now we move on to position units as a whole, simply because of what I just said. It's one of the more obvious positions that needs the biggest camp. And while, I asked Connor Colby, I think I asked Logan Jones, Jennings Dunker, like, is this different? Like, how different is this for you, this flipping scheme after Tim Lester's taken over? Because RPOs can be difficult in terms of
Yeah.
getting the penalty of ineligible receiver downfield. Like that's a big thing. And they've all been like,
Yep.
not really that different. You just got to make sure you're blocking. Like, oh, okay, cool. Thanks. Thanks for the insight. So
Yeah.
I according to them, it's not that big of a difference. I don't know that I believe that.
Yeah.
They are media trained, believe it or not.
Yeah.
And so I'm really curious as to how they take a step forward, because this has been what, the third year in a row where we've been talking about this.
Yep.
And they'd like, if they're gonna win and win a lot of games,
Yeah.
the offensive line just simply has to be better. Like there's
Yes.
bar none.
Well, yeah, it's that simple. They have to play at a much higher level than they've played at over the last few years. And this, you know, make or break is a little strong, but this is a big year for those guys and George Barnett. Like, he's been there. This is, I think, his fourth season starting now, something like that.
I think was Ellsbury or not Ellsbury, Linderbaum his first year.
That
That
sounds
would have
right.
been 2021.
Yeah, so this would be starting his fourth year then.
Yes.
Yeah. And this offensive line unit is full of guys who have logged a lot of games. I mean, Richmond started 4 years. Colby started the better part of 4 seasons. Dunker started a while. Jones, Stevens, etc. Like all these guys have a lot of time in the system. They all seem healthy now. Knock on wood, that stays the same. But I feel this is definitely a big year for them to, they need to put it together, produce at that high level, get the offense to a level that it can be at least obviously not a joke, but it can be successful. And if Iowa wants to win 10, 11 games, it's last year's blueprint for that is not a reliable way to do that. Relying on tremendous defense and just smoke and mirrors on offense and special teams, especially when you don't have Torrey Taylor out there flipping field position for you in the punting game, and you don't have Cooper DeJean returning punts. So you can't, I don't think, rely on that as much. So the offense needs to shoulder a bigger load of the burden this year. And that starts up front. It starts with the guys in that offensive line unit, like you said. Like they need to put it all together and push forward this year.
Who's another position unit that you think needs a big camp?
I mean, let's stay on the offensive side, and you mentioned them already, but wide receivers. I mean, it starts up front for the offense, but then it goes to the perimeter basically, and the wide receivers. Like the passing game production has been so dreadful the last few years, and there are many falls or many faults for that. It's not just the receivers, but that's been a big one. I mean, Iowa hasn't had a receiver with over like 300 yards receiving for a couple years now, which is crazy. So like they just need a lot more consistent production. They need guys to get open, and they need guys to catch the ball when it's thrown. I mean, we've seen a fair number of drops the last couple years. So, you know, you got a refresh now with the coaching on that side of that part of the offense with Lester and Budmeyer. What can that refresh do to the receivers in particular? We've talked about Howard and Bowie, Caleb, Gill, Seth Anderson. He's kind of the forgotten man in that wide receiver room, but he's logged a lot of reps, at least prior to Iowa. Last year was kind of a weird season for him at Iowa, but hopefully with Lester, the new offense, Budmeyer, new wide receiver coach, kind of a fresh start for Anderson, hopefully. And Iowa can see a lot better from him than what he was able to produce last year. But yeah, I just think that unit really needs to step forward, and it's got to be. I mean, the bar is so low in terms of production for them to exceed what they've done, but Iowa needs them to be much better than the just absolute bottom rung receiving unit in the Big Ten.
So to reference this potential breakout article one more time, I was writing, well, I wrote Jerry Bowie first, and then in the quote unquote honorable mentions, I had Dayton Howard in there. And what I included about Howard, I had Derek Terrell Washington in there too. And I may have, maybe we could have considered him a guy who needed the most out of camp because he's a guy who flipped positions, right? He played running back and now he's a receiver. So you could consider him in there. But in terms of potential breakout candidates, you probably could list every single one of the scholarship receivers because
Yeah.
it could be any of them. Because
Yeah.
who's done the most? Caleb Brown,
I guess, yeah, but
Seth
it's not a lot.
Anderson, Seth Anderson. I guess it's not a lot, right?
Yep.
I mean, probably except for Alex Mota because he's been hurt a good contingent of his time there. He still needs to get his feet under him. But I mean, you could even list a walk on, Caden Weegan,
Yeah.
right? I mean, we've
Yeah.
heard about Alec Wick so damn much since
Yeah.
he's been on the roster too.
Yeah.
And so you could list any single one of these receivers. Jacob Gill, again, like he's a guy that needs to be in there. He's probably going to be playing a decent amount. Who are the six that were on the depth chart? Jerry Bowie, Dayton Howard, Seth Anderson, Caden Weegan, Terrell Washington, and Caleb Brown, correct?
Yep.
There's probably 8 guys if you go past that initial 2 deeps that will probably play some this year, maybe more, depending on
I
how
mean,
things go.
yeah, I mean, Gill is for sure going to play, even
Right.
though he wasn't listed in the two deeps. But yeah, and
Like,
then
is it Moda? Is it KJ Parker? Like, I was just on
yep.
the ANF podcast, and those guys love KJ Parker's high school film, and I can't blame them.
Yeah, yeah. Me too.
Right, right, yeah. That dude's a playmaker. Like, you
Yeah,
put the ball in his hands and good things happen, and you need as many of those guys on the field for the Iowa offense as possible. So,
absolutely.
receiver group is definitely one that could use a big camp. Then the next one that I listed, shockingly, also offense, the quarterbacks, man. Cade
Yep.
was able to participate in spring, but not fully participate. And now he is for the first time. He doesn't have that thigh injury this time. Excuse me. And he's full go. And he needs those reps. He needs them. As
Yeah.
experienced as he is, has been to the college football playoff, won a bunch of games with Michigan, won some games last year with Iowa before the ACL. He needs those reps. Not only him, Brendan Sullivan needs those reps. Marco Lainez just needs reps, period. James
Yeah.
Reeser just needs reps, period. Jackson Stratton just needs reps, period.
Yeah.
All of them do. Cade more
Yeah.
so in the offense, where Brendan Sullivan in the offense, but the rest of them just reps, period.
Yeah. I mean, the reality is there just literally aren't enough reps to go around for what all those guys need. So you just, do the best you can. But, obviously because they're the guys you're going to be relying on the most this year, Cade and Sullivan, I think you got to prioritize them in terms of reps and then quarterback work in the training camp. And Cade, I mean, with Cade, I think it's 2 main priorities. Number one, get reps, get comfortable running Lester's offense. And number 2, please, please, please stay healthy. Don't pick up any, lingering injuries. Cause I mean, the whole nonsense last year started with him getting hurt at Kids Day, that set him back. And then, when he came into the season, he was starting, but what would you say? He was at 60%, maybe 70% best at best. That was not the Cade McNamara that Iowa got last year was not the guy they thought they were getting from Michigan. And it wasn't his fault. It was the injuries primarily. But yeah, they just need him to be full go for when the season starts on August 31st. And that starts with being healthy. Like, just please don't pick up any stupid knocks or anything like that.
We talked about the possibility of talking about position battles, and we kind of did in that first part of the pod. If there is to be a true some level of competition at quarterback, Brennan Sullivan needs to get some reps with the ones and really figure out this offense as a whole too, so he can really
Yep.
use it. Uh,
Yep.
and on the defensive side of things, it's really just the defensive line, right?
Yeah.
Like,
And it's really just the second unit of the defensive
right.
line, essentially, because you feel good about those starters. Like,
Yep.
it's like Craig, Herkett, Black, and Graves. Like, all right, I feel great about those four guys, but it's like those four guys can't play every single snap. You need some guys behind them stepping up. So, like we've talked about a lot already, I think, who's going to emerge, who's going to step forward. Allen, Pittman, I think those are the best bets. And
Llewellyn.
that Llewellyn too. Yep, thanks. And then hopefully somebody else too, because Iowa has been at its best when they can really go at least 8 deep on that defensive line, and really, that allows Bell to sub out, and there's just isn't much drop off with that second unit, and that keeps the defense really, really tough when that second unit comes in, and it's almost as good as the first string guys. Then it's really hard to move the ball on Iowa.
I'll tell you what, I honestly feel good about the first 5. Like, I feel good about the first 4, obviously. The fifth being Max Llewellyn.
Yep.
Like, he has the frame. The frame is really what sticks out to me the most. 1, and then 2, prior to the spring game, he said, Kelvin Bell trusts me this year. Like, that's the difference. I'm allowed a little bit more freedom because he trusts me and he knows that I know the defense.
That's big.
Yeah, that sticks out. And that's why I included him in my breakout article. He played in 14 games last year. He had 13 tackles, 2.5 sacks, which is good as a reserve guy. But, I want that second level. I want him to be one of the main reasons why that second unit on the defensive line is like, oh, crap, we don't get plays off. Like, this defensive line is nasty every play.
Yeah, he's actually probably the better candidate to be kind of that Van Ness, Epinesa type disruptor off the bench coming in on the D line and blowing things up. And really, I can see him taking a big step forward as a really big impact sub this year, and then he can transition into likely a starting role next year.
Probably not a first or second round pick guy, but
No, I don't think
yeah.
the upside's that high.
Right.
But,
Yeah. Yeah. But a guy off the bench who can
yes.
come in and mess
Yeah.
things up. Brian Allen probably has more of a higher ceiling when we're talking about draft pick and just the physical tools and stuff like that. But in terms of just needing to be solid, it's the second unit with the defensive tackles. Jeremiah Pittman is serviceable. You need another guy who can step up and be serviceable. Jeff Bowie has had a ton of injuries in his career. He's a junior now. And then you got Will Hubert and Luke Gaffney, 2 walk-ons. It just, the youth isn't quite there yet. They're still on the way up. So you're relying on walk-ons, which is not ideal. But if they can play and they can give you what you need, and Y.A. Black and Aaron Graves can step to the sidelines sometimes, like bare minimum, that's a step in the right direction. Last thing before we get out of here, we want to talk a little bit about, last year we got the ever famous Cade McNamara mic'd up at fall camp, which everybody was so excited for. I've gone back and listened a couple times, and it's still fun to listen to. I guess, and we've also had Quinn Schulte during the spring. We had Luke Lachey during the spring. Who would you most like to have mic'd up in fall camp, Ross?
I mean, I'm going to cheat and take the guy you listed first because I think he is the best choice. But come on, Jay Higgins. He's a great quote. He's a great listen. He was tremendous at Big Ten Media Days. He gives great, really thoughtful, entertaining responses to questions. And he's just, really, especially now, he's very comfortable in his role and in his skin as a leader for this defense, as a starter and a key player. I think him mic'd up, it's talking to his teammates and everything, would be really, really, really entertaining.
So I threw in one that I think would be fun because he's kind of the new toy, right? It's John Nestor. I want to hear what he's like during practice, because we've got him at media availability and he's been awesome. And hear that and to get a glimpse of what he's like in practice too, that is so impressive to the coaches, I think that'd be really fun. And I
Yeah,
really think it's that simple. Like he doesn't have to be a phenomenal quote or anything like that. Though, like
right.
guys like Jay Higgins is, Nick Jackson would be a great choice.
Yep.
But just to see what it's like and why he's been impressive in practice.
Yeah. On the offensive side of the ball, Sullivan. I mean, just to hear, like, you kind of do a comparison with him and Cade from last year a little bit, but just to see, see what he's like, see how he reacts and talks to guys. I think quarterbacks are a little more interesting than some guys. So
I'd be surprised. I'd be very surprised if they did that.
yeah,
Talk about the
yeah.
quickest way to piss off Kate.
That's a good point. Yeah.
Also, he's a pretty quiet dude, and I imagine he, while wanting to compete for a spot, understands where he's at currently. Like if it's early in fall camp and I'm Brendan Sullivan, I
I'm
not
not saying anything
at all. Yeah, at all. So maybe that would make it
Yeah,
boring.
that's a good point. He might not actually be that insightful or entertaining to listen to. He might be very, very buttoned up.
The other guy that's a really good quote on the defensive line that I think would be fun. Well, Aaron Graves would be fun on that defensive line, but I think Deontay Craig would be great. Like
Yeah,
he's had little cameos during some of
yeah.
these mic'd up situations, like with Luke, he had one. And I just really like he's just a guy that, and you talk about Jay being really fun with the media, but like Deontay is just a guy that attracts people.
Hmm.
Like he's just relaxed. He's funny. He's a cool guy. He's kind to everyone. Like I just would really like to see what he's like in practice.
Yeah, I
Anybody
agree.
else?
On defense or offense or just in
Either
general.
side.
I mean, wide receivers are often pretty good in those mic'd up situations. Who of the Iowa receivers would be your first pick for
Well, they're not doing Caleb Brown.
yeah. Caleb
Probably
Brown off the table. So
right.
who's
Right. Yeah.
who's the best of the rest?
Right. Just because of man, it's just hard because it's such a young group. They don't have a single senior, right? Like Seth
Yeah.
Anderson.
Yeah. Or maybe Jacob Gill. I mean, it's kind of the same thing as Sullivan. He's the new guy, so maybe he's not going to be, that
Right.
talkative or whatever. But
Yeah.
I mean, wide receivers just in general kind of tend to have more, outgoing personalities and more, you got to have a lot of self-confidence, obviously, to be a good receiver. So, they're just a little more expressive. But it's tough because, like you said, these are such a young unit that don't really have a good feel for their personalities yet, I think.
And like do any of them have that wide receiver confidence? Because like, what have they put on the field?
Well, that's true. That's fair.
Right? Yeah.
They need to get that confidence up.
Uh, the last name that I think of offensively is a dude who is just so fascinating with the mullet, the mustache, the sheer amount of protein that he's consumed in his life, the weight he lost this offseason. I think he's like some crazy major. I need to look it up. Jennings Dunker.
Oh, he's like some sort of engineering. It's
Is he?
I think.
You tell the people about why. Oh, I can tell the people why I would want him, and if you want to look up his major,
Yeah.
the dude is just fascinating. He's interesting. He's funny also. Like it's not just like he's an interesting story. He gives a hard time to his teammates and stuff like that. He's just an interesting character, and believe it or not, some of the premium content for folks. He's a big reason why Lucas Allgaier committed to Iowa in the 25 class. He's going to be nasty, and I think a lot of people are going to like him a lot. So a little bit of a glimpse for you there, but I was talking to Lucas about Jennings, and I said, yeah, he's a different cat, and Lucas goes, yeah, he is. So I think that'd be really fun.
Yeah, he's a human physiology major, so
Okay.
potential future doctor there.
Okay. I don't
I
know how
mean,
I feel about
maybe.
Jennings Dunker, the big redheaded dude with the mustache walking in. Yeah, I have the sniffles, Jennings, Dr. Dunker.
Dr. Dunker.
Anyway, that'll wrap it up here for this episode of HawkCast. We appreciate you tuning in for this dynamic duo of yesteryear and
Adam will be back next time. Don't worry.
yes, he will. He is okay. We promise. Uh,
Yep.
but some fall camp preview here for this episode. We appreciate you tuning in. If you are listening on YouTube, make sure you smash that subscribe button. drop a like, drop a comment. Let us know what you're most excited about for fall camp. Who would you like to have mic'd up and why? Tell us right here. And if you're listening on Apple Podcast, Spotify, you might be listening but not subscribed. So hit that subscribe button so you don't miss an episode. Drop a rate and review. Helps us out a lot. And of course, it makes us very happy. And of course, if you're not a premium subscriber yet as well at iowa.rivals.com, you can do that today. iowa.rivals.com/subscribe. Tons of intel and content regarding men's basketball recruiting, football recruiting, women's basketball recruiting, and of course, camp right around the corner. Well, happening as we speak for football. So check us out there. We'd love to have you there on our boards and enjoying some of that premium content. For now, I am Eliot Clough at Eliot Clough on Twitter, joined by managing editor of Hawkeye Beacon, Ross Binder, and we will see you next time.